Welcome beyond the Reiki Gateway. I'm your host, Andrea Kennedy. Like countless others, Reiki found me when I wasn't even looking, and then it ignited a whole new world of questions. This podcast explores topics of interest for the spiritually curious. Join me for discussions and special guests on subjects such as past lives, crystal healing, spiritual awakening, ascension, energy healing, and more, all to assist and inspire you along your unique soul's journey. This episode is sponsored by Mainstream Reiki, offering live and online Reiki classes and a membership community to help Reiki practitioners succeed and grow in their practice. Find out more at mainstreamreiki.com. Before the episode gets rolling, I'd like to let you know that this episode contains a discussion of suicide, surviving after a loved one's suicide, and also struggling with suicidal thoughts and self-harm. We'd like for you to prioritize your own mental well-being if you choose to listen. Please take care of yourself and remember that your mental health matters. You matter. And if you'd like to skip this episode or save it for later, we invite you to do that. Welcome to Beyond the Reiki Gateway. I'm your host, Andrea Kennedy, and I have such a remarkable and special guest with me, Rosemary Thornton. And I think that you will very much enjoy this discussion. Rosemary actually died for more than 10 minutes, and she's here today to talk about her life before that day and also what happened after. And she wrote a book about her experience called Remembering the Light: How Dying Saved My Life. Welcome to the show, Rosemary. I don't really want to say much more than that. I really want our listeners and our viewers on YouTube to get the story straight from you. And I am just so grateful to have you here on the show with me. And thank you for being here with us.
You're very welcome.
Yes. I would like to, start with a little bit about who you were before this happened. If you can tell us a little bit about your life prior to that day of your death.
The day of my death. That's interesting. In my mid 40s, I met a man that I thought really was the love of my life. We were both, as I say, half a bubble off plum. We were always kind of oddballs, I guess, and to find each other was a great blessing. And our first phone call, because we met on one of the online dating sites, and our first phone call, we talked for, I think, 2.5 hours. And we had so much in common. He had been abandoned by a father when he was a young person, and I had suffered a similar fate. And we talked a lot about that. We talked a lot about growing up with a single mom and the challenges of that, and knowing your dad is down the street but isn't involved with your life. And there were so many other places where we really connected. He was an avid reader, an avid historian. One of our first dates, we talked in depth about the Grover Cleveland presidency. And I thought, this is a rare find that he and I can get into this long debate. And one of the most endearing things he did, we went on a first date, and on our first date, we went to an art show, and we both enjoyed it. But we were walking down the sidewalk to get to the show, and he said he had the most beautiful male voice I've ever heard, a baritone voice, but he said, "Well, this is wrong." And he took the outside as we walked down the sidewalk, and he said, "In case a carriage goes by and hits a mud puddle, I don't want the muck to splash up on you." So I I was smitten. And he was also a successful professional, and he was very charming, and I don't know. I really fell hard for him. He had a beautiful big white bushy beard, and I've always been a fan of beards. He actually there's a movie called The Oldest Living Confederate Widow, and it stars Donald Sutherland. It was based on a book by Alan something. And in the movie, he has this enormous white beard. And I thought, I have manifested Donald Sutherland in my life. But he's very interesting, very well read. He had an eidetic memory. He memorized pretty much everything he ever read. He was probably the most brilliant man I've ever met, much less known well. And our first date lasted about 12 hours. We just didn't want to say goodbye. And then our next date, and I mean, it became one of those things where very quickly we just stayed with each other all the time. And then we were married, I guess, about 7 months later. And I thought we were happy. I think there was a lot of happiness within that marriage. And not quite 10 years into the marriage, he came home for lunch one day, and I happened to be out of town, and he ended his life at our home. And to say it was devastating is no understatement. I lost my mind. You know, I had, I guess what the world would call a psychotic break, or I went insane. I'm not sure what. My family actually looked into putting me into a psychiatric hospital, but I told them bluntly. I said, I can't be trapped behind any doors right now. You know, despite all their best efforts, I'm sure I will find a way to end my life. So, but I did seek mental health care, and yet it wasn't doing the trick. I remember one of the first things the psychiatrist said to me. I found a good psychiatrist. One of the first things she said to me was, "You're in shock." And this was like 6 weeks out from his death. She said, "You're in shock and you're not going to remember pretty much anything I've said to you today," which is mostly true. She said, "But I want you to remember one thing. You were in no way responsible for what this man did. No way." And then another friend told me, and my friends told me this repeatedly, and it took, I don't know, a couple years to sink in. There is nothing you could have done to prevent this. Nothing. And there is nothing you could have done to cause this. And if I could have 5 minutes with everyone who's lost somebody dear to them, a spouse or a child to suicide, I would try to write that on their heart. And it's true. And I think it's September is Suicide Prevention Month. And I turn off Facebook during that month because I turn off social media during that month. What passes around on social media is, if you're feeling sad, reach out to me. I can help. This isn't about people feeling sad. And saying that, I wish people would understand saying that is such a slap in the face to people like me and anyone who's lost somebody very close to them, because it implies that we were not available enough, we were not kind enough, compassionate enough, that we were too obtuse to notice what was really happening. And it's so unjust. But I struggled for 2.5 years. And in fact, a financial advisor sat me down, I guess about 6 months into this, and she said, "Now let's talk about goals. Where do you see yourself in, a year or two?" Actually, I think she said, "Where do you see yourself in 2 years?" And I said, I'll be dead. I'm not going to survive this. And she said, "Well, that's not very hopeful. It's also not very helpful." But that I could not imagine. I literally could not imagine anybody surviving this much pain. I had no intention of it. And every night I prayed 3 prayers: God, either heal me or let me go. No life review when I go. And I knew it wouldn't be long. And I did not want to see myself broken to bits. I didn't want to see my friends fleeing like rats deserting a sinking ship, which they did. Suicide survivors, which is what we're known as, suicide survivors are the 21st century lepers. People don't want to touch us. People don't want to be near us. I think actually it'd be better if they'd put us in leper colonies, so at least we could talk to each other. And by the way, that was one of my saving graces, a social media group called Sisterhood of Surviving Spouses or something. I can't remember the name right now. I reached out to them and they reached out to me and they saved me. And I learned that so many of the things I went through are absolutely typical. And by so many things, I mean abandonment by friends and even family. The in-laws go bye-bye because, after all, if it hadn't been for you, we probably wouldn't have done this. I mean, the things that the wives get put through are immeasurable. And I guess it's not just wives, but husbands as well. Because when your spouse does this, you, the survivor, become the lead suspect in a homicide investigation. And I often liken this to the 1960s victims of sexual assault. Why were you out on the street at 2 a.m? Why were you wearing that leather miniskirt? Did you really need to be in those heels? Did you say something to him that led him on? And that's what we're doing with suicide survivors, is we're questioning them as though it is their fault. In fact, one of the questions the cops drilled me on, what was the nature of your last argument with your husband?
My
And what I
goodness.
said, I was actually at an airport trying to get back home when I received the call and an inquiry. And I said, this is not an appropriate question for this time. And yeah, so I wish we could find a way. And I know in other countries, in fact, somebody told me in Canada, they do provide advocacy for somebody who's just lost someone to suicide, rather than the police boring into them and saying, what was your involvement in this? They're advocacy groups, because when it's unbelievable now, but I got word by telephone that my husband had been found, dead. And I hung up the phone. I had a typical smartphone, and I thought, I have to call my daughter, because I pretty much fainted when I got the news. I mean, I started to drop, and I propped myself up on something and said, you can faint later, but not now. But I looked at my phone. I thought, I have to call my daughter and tell her what's happened. And I looked at my smartphone, and I remember thinking, why did I buy a phone that I don't know how to use? And I looked at it and I thought, how do you make this go? And I was with my other daughter at the time, and I handed her the phone. I said, how do you make this go? That's what trauma does to your brain. A simple, mundane task like calling somebody, and you're like, I don't know what to do. So 2.5 years went by thus, and I had a plan to end my own life because I couldn't take the pain. And I kept telling myself, wait 24 hours, wait 48 hours, wait 24 hours. And I would go to that psychiatrist, and she said, are you having any suicidal ideations? And I'd say, oh, no, I'm fine, because I knew I had to keep my mouth shut. And what she said was, I know that you are, and I know that you're lying, but I hope you don't do this. And I wish you'd reach out to me before you do try anything. And that's very typical. By the way, a little interesting aside, survivors of suicide, again, that's how we're known, survivors of suicide are 12 to 48 times more likely than the average person to take their own life. Because it's like, well, if this guy did it, I want to do it too. And that group I mentioned, Sisterhood of Suicide Survivors, that's the name of the group. Within that group, in the, I guess, 7 years I've been in that group, we've already lost 4 women to suicide that just couldn't take it. And yeah, so it's a real problem. So if we're going to, circling back, and I won't get off on a tangent, but if we're going to talk seriously about suicide prevention, let's seek out people who are 12 to 48 times more likely to end their own life. Let's reach out to them instead of putting them on a leper colony and pretending they don't exist. And my husband was a professional. I'd written books on architecture that did, did pretty well. And I had a name for myself in the world of architecture, a really preservationist, I guess. So together we were pretty popular, and we had these yard parties and had big crowds show up. Well, after his death, not one of those people remained in my circle, not one. And the people who were in my circle are the people that came in from the periphery, what the world might call working class people. They swarmed me. Well, I can't say swarm, but there were 3 people in particular who rushed in and said, we know that there's a chance we're going to lose you, but we're going to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. One of those people took me into her own home for 4 months, and she had a very exhausting, demanding, difficult job. She's identified in my book as Tracy, her real name, by the way. But she would come into my room, my room where I was staying with her, at the end of every exhausting day, sometimes at 11 at night, and she would stand at the foot of my bed and pray for me and ask the angels to watch over me. And she said often I would be writhing, moaning, crying in my sleep as I laid in that bed, half asleep or even fully asleep. And she said when she would pray for me and invoke the name of Jesus and ask God and his angels to take care of me, she said your breathing would calm down, it'd even out, you would settle down, and you'd slip into a more restful sleep. And I really believe that those prayers and the prayers of so many people are what saved me. I had a blog that I had maintained. It had, I think, 1,000 blogs actually the name of the website was searshomes.org. And at that blog, it stopped being about houses and it became about prayers. And I would just blog, I'm sinking beneath the waves. And my very faithful readers, very sweet souls, would invariably leave the most beautiful comments you can possibly imagine. They would say, "Rosemary, you are in my prayers every day." So, I do get a lot of lovely emails today from people who say my story helped them, my healing is a blessing for them. And I always want to say, then I wish we could go back and be grateful to the woman who took me in, and to the guy who I shared a space with, was like a mother to me, to all the people who rallied around me and said, "We're not going to lose you." Because, now my story's been heard by lots and lots of folks. But I wish I could point back to them and say, if you're grateful I'm here, they're the reason, because I want it out. So 29 months passed this way, and then I was diagnosed with stage 2 cancer. And I was actually, they did a surgery related to the cancer. And it was after the surgery, like in the recovery room, that things went wrong. I told the nurse that I was bleeding profusely, and she said, "Oh, once you get home and lie down, you're going to be fine." And I said, "No, I'm 59 years old. I don't think I'm going to be fine. Something's gone very wrong here." And 3 times I said that, and 3 times she told me just to go home and lie down. And so I did. And on the way home, things got worse, and I got home and I laid down in my little bed, and I realized I was still bleeding. And I joke about this, but it's true. I had this beautiful home with white wall-to-wall carpet, brand new. And I didn't want to mess up the carpet. So I went and stood in the bathroom, and actually went into the shower and stood there. And I thought, you've been praying for God to heal you or let you go. And there's a verse, I think it's 1 Corinthians 10:13. It says, "God will show you a way out." And I thought, this is my way out. God has shown me a way out. This is God's mercy and grace. I get to go. So in that bathroom, in that shower stall, I thought, all I have to do is sit down on this shower stall. And I was already getting pretty weak, and I thought, I'm out. So I thought about that, and then I thought about all the people who worked so hard to keep me alive, and I thought, is that really fair to them? And I thought, no, it's not. So I left the shower stall, went out to the living room, asked the people who were with me to get me to the hospital. We actually summoned an ambulance, took me to a little ER, a very small ER. They made some more mistakes. They also didn't take me seriously. I've since learned that it's called a gynecological bleed, is taken very seriously, especially post-surgery, something like that. I mean, there's a lot of things can go wrong there. So I was in this little ER, and my friend, the one who treats me, who's as kind as a mother to me, he was with me in this little ER, and they examined me, and for whatever reason, I don't know what the plan was, but they gave me some morphine. And in retrospect, it's fun. I used to give this talk before COVID in front of live audiences. And whenever I say, and they gave me morphine, everyone in the audience goes, or all the medical personnel will go, because that's about the worst thing you can do for somebody who's bleeding to death. Anyway, after they gave me this, they actually, as a morphine derivative, they left the room. And I passed out very quickly because I had lost so much blood. I didn't know a human being could lose that much blood and still be alive. Uh, and one of the most remarkable things, as the doctor was examining me, trying to figure out what was going on, this RN about my age was by my side. She was seated, or maybe she was standing to my left, and she held my hand, and I exacted a promise from her that she wasn't going to let me die. And she said, "Oh, honey, we have many solutions for this. We're not going to let you die." And it wasn't just the words, but the sincerity and the power behind the words. I was like, okay. And then they gave me the Dilaudid, and they left the room. They put a blood pressure cuff on me, one of those automatic dealies. And my friend, and shortly after they gave me that morphine derivative, I just passed right out. And my friend said he looked at the blood pressure cuff at one moment, and it said 32/25, which is, mostly gone. And he was getting up to get the nurse, and he said, "Rose, you opened your eyes, and you tried to sit up on the gurney." And he said, "You reached up your hands to heaven, reached up your hands above you, wiggled your fingers." He said, "Almost like a child reaching for a parent." And I don't remember that, but I suspect that's when my soul left. And he said, after that, you flop back down, and the blood pressure cuff went to error, which meant it was lower than 32/25. But meanwhile, I was having the time of my life, literally, time of my eternal life, maybe. But I had been in what I perceived to be a deep, dreamless state. And I awakened being catapulted out of my body. And I mean, very dramatically catapulted. It's like it went right up to the cusp of being scary, but it was fun. And I started floating away from my body, floating further and further away. And I couldn't see my body. I was ensconced in this perfect blackness, not a speck of light. It's that kind of blackness like when you wake up at a cabin in the woods and you can't even see your hand in front of your eyes. But I remember thinking, I'm scared of the dark. I always slept with a little bit of light somewhere. And I thought, but I know the most perfect peace I've ever known in this experience. And I did. It's like the blackness was, I heard somebody else describe it as velvety. It was like it was actively infusing me with peace. And I remember thinking about the Bible verse, the perfect peace that passeth all understanding. And I thought, that's this peace. That's what Paul was talking about. This peace, there's no understanding it. There's no explaining it to other people. But early on, one of the first things that happened in this new experience was I said out loud, again, out loud, I said, my heart has stopped. And I thought, how do I know that? And I thought, I don't know how I know that, but I know that's right. And then my next thought was, and this was more than a thought, this was spoken out loud as somebody who's a neurotic writer who spends too much time talking to the animals in the house, like, hey, Teddy, do you want breakfast now? Hey, Teddy, your water bowl looks a little dirty. We should clean that right up. Hey, Teddy, you want to go out and play? I mean, you get it. A lot of people do that. Uh, I said, I'm dying. And then I thought, no, actually, you're not dying. You're dead. Because, when you're dancing off this mortal coil, the most important thing is correcting your tense. And it cracked me up. I thought, you're still funny. Your macabre, moribund sense of humor is still present. And that was immensely comforting because I thought that's who I am. I'm a goofball, odd, weird person who loves saying weird things. And yet I thought it was pretty funny. And I laughed out loud. And I thought, I don't have lungs. I don't have vocal cords. I don't think. I don't have all the accoutrements by which typically you produce and hear sound. And yet I thought, I'm talking and I hear it. And I started life in broadcasting a million years ago. So I know what my voice sounds like. And I thought, yeah, this is great. And I remember thinking, everything I really am has made this transition. My goofy sense of humor, my intellect, my natural curiosity about what's happening around me. So many memories. I did not have a life review, but I remembered the love of the firefighters who came to the house and tried to help me down the very steep stairs that they couldn't get a stretcher down. And I just remembered the love they had shown me, the tremendous love. And I also remembered I was supposed to start daily radiation and chemotherapy next week. I thought, nope, I'm out. That has ceased to be a problem. And I also thought about the bills that I had left unpaid on my desk. I thought, nope, that's not my problem either. But it was really very comforting that all those memories were still present. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, all this cool stuff, again, the intellect, the sense of humor, my unique voice, my funny little giggle, my weird way of seeing the world has come with me. So what did I leave behind on that gurney? And I remember thinking the stress, the anxiety, the regret, the remorse, the sadness, the guilt, all of the negative things were what got left behind. And I remember thinking all my life, I've suffered with such profound anxiety. And I thought, I've always wondered what I would look like separate from that anxiety. And I thought, this is it. This is what I look like. I thought, this is great. And this experience went on and on and on. One of the early things that happened is I felt the presence of a massive spiritual being to my left and slightly behind me. And I remember turning and looking up again in this perfect blackness and saying out loud, and who are you? And the answer was, before I could even finish the sentence, the answer was, you are the image and likeness. I'm the original. And I thought, wow. Genesis 1, I think 25 and 26. I've spent, we're made in the image and likeness of God. I've spent my whole life. What does it mean to be made in the image and likeness of God? And I thought, what it means is there's an original. And there have been so many times. There was one day I woke up, and this is a couple years after this experience, but I woke up and I thought, I feel really sick today. I feel crummy. I'm not happy. Life sucks right now. And I walked into the kitchen and there was a bottle of juice and it said the original. And I remember thinking, oh, yeah, there is an original. I'm the image and likeness. I don't need to suffer all this. That has been so comforting. So this went on and on. I was in that blackness. I was dead as the world measures things, I was dead for more than 10 minutes. But in my own experience, if I came back and you said you were gone for 4 days, I'd be like, no, I can buy that. Because what is time? What is time but the earth spinning around the sun? And Einstein said to those of us who are committed physicists, the past, present, and future are only illusion, however persistent. So time is very much a construct of this earthly plane. I mean, look at time out on Jupiter. How long does a year take on Jupiter?
I
A
know,
lot
right?
more than our time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Venus is shorter, and yeah, it's all.
It's all
So yeah, it seemed
relative.
like I was gone forever. Very much so. So I came back. I mean, I this went on and on and on, and I mean on and on and on. And one of the things that happened, again, still floating in this blackness, is I very much felt the presence of other spiritual beings. Couldn't see them, but I could feel that I was not alone in this experience, which was also pretty comforting. But even when I felt alone, at the very beginning when I was popped out of my body, I was just so comfortable. I was so happy, the happiest I've ever been in my 59 years. But one of the things I said to the spiritual beings in my presence, I said, this floating in the blackness stuff, this is very familiar. And they said, and I said, within this lifespan, this feels some about this. And the angel said, remember the story your mother told you that you had been, uh, I had been given up for dead. I had been alive for 3 weeks. I contracted blood poisoning, turned to sepsis. And one night, the doctor, I was 3 weeks old, the doctor came to my mother. He was very faithfully sitting by my little crib in the hospital. And he said, her kidneys have now failed. The toxins are spreading to her organs. This won't take long. She'll be gone before morning. But we're not going to let you sit here and watch this baby die. Go home and focus on your 3 sons. And they shoot her out. They shoot her out of the hospital. And my mother, as a mother of 3 daughters, this always gets me, but my mother said that she went home and called a friend and they spent the night praying for me. And the next morning I had this miraculous healing. I went home and the nun at the hospice, Catholic hospital, the next morning, the nun handed me over to my mother and said, your prayers saved this baby. So in this experience floating away from this body, the angel said, yep, you weren't close to death. You crossed over. Back you go. And throughout my life, I'd had a fascination. I mean, ever since Raymond Moody's Life After Life came out in 76 or 77, old trade paperback, I read it over and over and over again. And then I read Betty Eadie, Daniel Brinkley, George Ritchie, all of them. Could not get enough of that. And I was like, okay, well, this new information about what happened when I was born is very helpful. But it would have been more helpful to know when I was the weirdo kid on the playground in first grade or for the rest of my life, because I've always felt that I had a knowing that exceeded what other people experienced on this earth. So I was grateful to know this, and this just went on. And there's this blank where the floating ended, and I'm in a white room. And in the white room, there's a door about 15 feet in front of me, and there's a mist. And the white, I can't begin to describe the white. I had a solar tube put in my house. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but they kind of garner the sun's rays and direct them into living space. The perfect light in that solar tube, which you can barely look at, is not as beautiful as the white light. Maybe that's why I love solar tubes. It's not as beautiful as the white light in that room. There was a white mist falling in the room, but it wasn't just falling. It was swirling, actively moving around me. I remember trying to focus on an individual droplet because it sounds crazy, but I thought I should be able to. And again, the angel that was with me said, your new eyes have not acclimated to the spiritual environment yet, but what you're seeing are particles of light. And I was told it was akin to a spiritual car wash, that some people die with a disease process or mental limitations or mental illness so heavily imprinted on their soul that it needs to be stripped away from them before they can advance to heaven. And I thought, that makes a lot of sense. And it was also very comforting. As a friend told me one time, she said, it's like, leave your muddy boots at the door. We don't go to heaven with all the tragedy and the upset of earth trailing behind us. And the other thing I found fascinating as a wordsmith, the word personality is Latin for the word mask. And we leave all that behind. Somebody shared an interesting story. Throughout this experience, I heard somebody screaming the word Rosemary over and over and over again. The more I got into the experience, the softer that voice got. It was like I was moving and they were at a fixed point and could not move, but they were screaming it. And yet, in retrospect, I realized that I didn't even associate with the name Rosemary anymore. It was like the beep, beep, beep of an annoying alarm clock when all you want to do is just rest. And I thought that was so interesting. And by the way, when I came back, I asked somebody, I said, was that nurse screaming my name? And he said, screaming. You could hear it all up and down the hallways. She was screaming Rosemary. I said, I thought I heard it probably about 40 times. And he said, every bit of it. And paramedics, I just read this thing that paramedics now understand if you're trying to resuscitate a patient, don't scream their name because we've already disassociated from that name in this new experience. But say something like, your dog needs you or your children need you. And that's had more success in bringing back people. Isn't that interesting?
It does remind me, though, of when you were in the shower and you had that decision to make in the shower, but you thought about the other people who had cared for you. So to me, it sort of parallels that, at least in my mind. So that's so remarkable that your voice
It is.
And those other characteristics that you talked about, that was you, but you didn't associate with your name.
Very much not so. And like I had left all that anxiety behind.
Yes.
That facet of my personality was already gone. So in that white room, I remember being told, if you decide to go back, you'll be restored to wholeness. And it wasn't said you'll be healed of the grief or that this disease process will be gone, but you'll be restored to wholeness. And I was like, yeah, good to know. We don't need to talk about that. And I got to this door and I remember thinking in this white room, I really wish I'd looked down at my legs, but I remember thinking, I don't know if I have legs or feet or the mechanism by which I need to get to that door, but I know that I can perambulate with intention and be at that door. And I remember using the word perambulate with intention. So even my vocabulary went with me. And I got to that to that door and I noticed it was observed that I noticed the door was shut and that kind of annoyed me. And I thought, that door ought to be open based on all the NDE stories I've read, but it was shut. And I put up my right hand to push through it. Pretty interested by the fact that I'm right-handed on earth and right-handed in heaven. I thought that was neat. But I hadn't even actually raised my hand. I just had started the process and I paused and I asked, is this the divine will for my life? That a medical mistake sends me on. And I never even got past, is this the divine? And the answer was immediate. And again, it was communicated. It was infused into me. And the answer was no, it is not. But whatever you decide, either way, you go with all of God's mercy and grace and blessings and care and love. And I thought, I'll take that deal. And that was an answer to my third prayer, no more hard decisions. I had suffered tremendously from decision fatigue throughout this whole post time after his death. So I was ready to go, and I was shown a vision of the nurse who had held my hand and treated me with such compassion. And in this vision, the nurse was seated in a hospital supply room. She was on a little metal stool, and she was leaning forward, head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, the heartbreaking sobs that, we're all familiar with. And she said through tears, I promised that woman I wasn't going to let her die, and I lost her.
Hello, it's Andrea, and in addition to being your host here at the podcast, I'm the founder of Mainstream Reiki, where bringing Reiki further into the mainstream is my mission. I offer quality Reiki classes of all levels to students attending live from around the world. And I've built a membership community as well to help Reiki people connect with each other through discussions, events, and Reiki practice. So if you're considering learning Reiki or you already have, I invite you to visit mainstreamreiki.com to discover your next step in your Reiki journey. Thank you. And now back to the show.
And I thought, oh, come on. She's about my age. She's lost other patients. She's an RN. She's been through. She can get through it again. Because I wanted to go. I did not want to go back to that train wreck of a life I had. And it was a train wreck. And then instead of just being an invisible observer in that room with her, I felt her pain. I co-experienced her extreme regret and grief and sadness. And I recognized it as the horrific pain I had known after my husband's suicide. A lot of self-blame there. And I thought, oh, that got me. I thought, if I can spare one soul on this earth that much pain, I guess I have to go back. And like that, in a millisecond, I was back on that gurney. And I shared this story with somebody, and they said, wasn't there a tunnel? Wasn't there like a backwoods wash? But in Hollywood, they aggrandize that whole moving through a tunnel thing. I've read that actually about 15% of NDE experiences involve a tunnel. And I've since read this. At the time I had this experience, I'd never heard of anybody else taken to a white room. But subsequent to this, I've heard at least 30 stories of people being taken to a white room. So this white room with a mist is not as uncommon as I thought. And while I was actually very hesitant to share this story with anybody, well, at first you tell everybody, just blah, 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 all your friends, blah, blah, blah. Guess what happened? I've met so many people who said, I had a story not dissimilar to yours, but I never had the nerve to share it. One woman told me, she said, I had a daughter born about the same time as you in the late 50s. And she said, and afterwards I suffered a postpartum hemorrhage. And I ultimately was resuscitated and came back. But as soon as I came back, I told the doctor, I said, I died, didn't I? And he said, well, you flatlined. And she said, I went to heaven. And the doctor looked at her, and this is right after she's had a baby. The doctor looked at her and said, don't ever tell anybody that story again. So it is bold. I really have new admiration for anyone who comes forward and tells a story about an NDE, because I do get some ugly comments from people. And my favorite, I love this one. You made it all up. After reading all those NDE accounts, if I was going to make something up, I'd stick to the formula. I
Yeah.
wouldn't tell this bizarre story. But anyway, I was taken by hospital to a trauma center. The trauma center, they worked on me, and I was there for 4 days, and a lot of incredible things happened there as well. I talk in my book about the angels singing to me in the hospital. I always thought of hospitals as pretty dark, depressing, negative energy kind of places, but the angels showed up at my bedside and sang to me, which is, I say I'll remember for the rest of my life. That's not true. I'll remember that for eternity, literally eternity. They sang to me. They surrounded the bed. They would come into the room. They wouldn't come in the room. They'd appear at the bed when my human helpers had to step out of the room for a bit. And they would appear at the bed, and they sang me songs glorifying God, and they glowed. And the more they sang about glorifying God, the more they glowed and got brighter and brighter and brighter. And they were wearing sparkly gowns made of light. It's like the gowns had beads or lights. It was just phenomenal. And I remember crying as the angels surrounded my bedside and sang to me, because it was like trying to put 100,000 amps through a 60 amp box. And I sobbed. And through sobbing, I said, "Don't stop. This is a lot to experience." And I also said, "I'm really good in architecture and memorizing houses, not so much with melody and lyrics." And they were very clear. They said, "This is not for you to remember. This is for your healing and your peace and your restoration. And this is a thank you for agreeing to come back, because we know that life on this earth is hard." And of all the emails I get, that's probably the number one comment people speak to. It is immensely comforting to know that the spiritual beings and angels that help us on earth get it. They know that life on this earth can be very, very hard. And it is at times. So this, one of the things that happened that really annoyed me. I had a woman come into my room, and she said, "I understand you have cancer and you'll be starting chemo and radiation soon." And she brought in all these fancy full color brochures on what to expect from chemo and how to manage this side effect and that side effect. And here's what's going to happen. And if this happens, there's medicine and blah, blah, blah. And I said, do not leave those in this room. Please leave. I don't need you here. I was healed in heaven. Please leave that stuff. Just take it with you and go. And she said, well, I'm going to leave it on your bed. I said, I don't know how to be any more clear. Do not leave that on my bed. And I said, don't put it in my trash can. Leave with those things. Because part of what made me angry was, one, I did not want this information. And secondly, I asked her to leave. And thirdly, I thought, where are all the color brochures when my husband killed himself and I'm on my own? Nobody to talk to, nobody to help me understand what in the world has just happened. Where's all the support for that? And the fact is, there's very, very little. There's suicide support groups led by peer counselors, people who just went to some training and had the experience themselves. And those I did not find helpful. Some people might, but I did not. But that really annoyed me, that if you have the right disease for which people feel sympathy, you get all the support. You get a lot more support. I can't say, oh, I know it's a horrible thing to go through. So I was discharged at 4 days, and I told the doctor, because it turns out when you die under medical care because a doctor made a boo-boo, they bring out the doctor who's been around a long time. They bring out the big doctors.
Oh, you're worthy then, I guess.
I guess so. And when you say I'm having a problem, they don't say, oh, just go home and lie down. They don't do that to you when, after you've gone through this. But I remember the doctor said, it's time for you to go home. And I said, I don't want to go home. They bring me food 3 times a day. They bring me snacks. They brought me apple juice whenever I wanted it. They brought me anything my little heart desired. And the fascinating thing, when I checked into that hospital, I weighed a certain weight. And when I left after 4 days of only eating hospital food, I had gained 10 pounds in bed just lying there. I was like, oh my gosh. Anyway, that was very annoying to me. But the doctor, I said, I like it here. They're very kind. The nurses come in and smile at me. I had suffered such profound loneliness after my husband's death. Loneliness, they are now saying that loneliness is worse than cigarette smoking for your health. We got to fix that problem too. But I was and now I had people attending me, people saying, can I get you another pillow so you can sit up? Do you want me to change? Did you need the phone brought over to the bedstand? I mean, everything. And so I told the doctor, I don't want to go home. I like it here. Besides, they're bringing chicken salad for lunch. I really like chicken salad. I was going to miss lunch. I'm still sore about that. But what he said, you have had such a catastrophic blood loss. He said your red and white blood cell count is extremely depressed. He said, if you get a disease, an iatrogenic disease like MRSA or staph or something, he said, you're dead. Nothing we can do to save you because you're so compromised right now. He said, if you go home, and I was required to have 24-hour care for 14 days, but he said, you need to be out of this environment. I thought, I'm out of here, because that did not sound appealing either. So I was discharged, but I really, really like the hospital. And the other thing, my blood work showed at the time of my admittance to the hospital, I think it's called a hematocrit, but my blood thingy was like at 6.4, something like that. It was in the sixes, which is barely enough to sustain human life. And when I left, it hadn't come up a lot and I knew it was down because I could not walk 10 feet without huffing and puffing like I couldn't get enough air. And I had somebody praying for me throughout this experience, and I called him up and I said, hey, George, they're telling me it's going to take 2 to 3 months for the bone marrow to regenerate the red and white blood cells so that I feel more normal. And he said, oh, we'll just see about that. And he talked about Gideon. Remember the story of Gideon in the Bible, when Gideon had all these great numbers of soldiers and God kept whittling it down until he just had a few. And George told me, he said, your healing is not in the numbers. Your healing comes from God. And 2 weeks out, it was 12 days after I had died. died. I had blood work done, and the doctor looked at it and said, we have to redo your blood work. The numbers are all wrong. And I said, what? He said, well, the numbers are textbook perfect. That's impossible. And I said, maybe not. I said, that breathlessness is gone and I'm not fainting anymore and I feel great. And it took a while. I actually had to find another doctor, another oncologist, because the other one wanted to start the chemo and radiation. And I said, I wish you'd take another test. He said, we're not doing that. And I had to find another doctor, and she wanted to wait a few weeks. And ultimately, it was really very dear. I mean, I was pretty nervous. I thought I heard well that it was healed in heaven, but this is kind of a big deal. And the second doctor after the surgery, because she did surgery, she biopsied lots and lots of places, took flesh from lots and lots of places. And she woke me up in the recovery room. I mean, when you're in recovery, you're like three sheets to the wind. And she shook me and shook me and shook me. And she woke me up and she said, you're right. There's not one cell of cancer anywhere we looked, not one cell left. And then she went to my friend in the waiting room and she told him, she said, her flesh is so pink and pretty and perfect. She said, I wouldn't believe she ever had cancer had I not seen the original tests myself. So it was a very dramatic healing. And I tell people the healing of the disease is huge. That's great. But I got a reset on my soul. And shortly after this, I remember when I was back home, I went to my bookcase and I pulled out my favorite old leather Bible, and it flopped open to the 23rd Psalm. And the line, He restoreth my soul, looked like it was highlighted, like just literally singled out with a bright light. And I thought, that's the healing, is my soul was restored. And I still had these thoughts, why did he do this? I thought he loved me. And I realized no. And it really felt angelic. The answer was no. That's not the question. You just circle in the mountain. Deuteronomy 2:3, I think, says you've circled the mountain long enough time to stop and to go north. I was asking the wrong questions. And I was given so many answers to so many things that had plagued me. And I was able to forgive myself. And then I was able to forgive him. And that was huge. And then I changed my life. I sold off all my worldly possessions, or a lot of them. I moved 1,000 miles due west to the Midwest because I like to just watch corn grow. And people laugh at that. But there's a lot of things happening in the Midwest, lots of trees, lots of open plains. When the thunderstorms come in from the plains, you can see them miles away. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And corn, when the wind sweeps across, it's like the song, but when the wind sweeps across the cornfield, they all just go together. So I managed to buy a house that overlooks a field. So now I can look out my back window and watch things grow. And that's all I want. I want color and I want to watch things grow.
Rosemary, I mean, I could just cry right now for so many wonderful reasons. And wow, what comes through while you talk is an energy, that I feel that is, I think, full of possibilities, of hope, of understanding, of peace, um, and just being with you is something in itself, even though we're not physically in the same place. I wanted to ask you the way that the healing happened for you, and the angels are there with you, and how every milestone you were outside the lines. The medical establishment, what they thought was possible, there's no explanation. What do you, well, no explanation on their part, I will say.
Right.
What do you, what do you think that means for us on Earth right now? If that can happen and you could be made whole in that way, is there a way that we can bring that to Earth as we walk through these times? Or maybe we shouldn't do that. Does that go against the way it's supposed to work? Because when I hear your story, I think of the suffering here, the difficulty, like you mentioned, and I thought, what if we could bring that in a more widespread way, in a more predictable way? And then I do have a feeling, though, maybe that's just not part of the plan right now, at least on Earth. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Those are big questions. I know that I get email from time to time where people say, I prayed for my mother and she's dead. How come you got healed and she didn't? And my answer to that is, I don't know. I don't have an answer. Uh, I I know that I know what happened for me, and that's what I can talk about. I can't talk about other people's experience and the whys, and I don't excuse me, I don't know the answer for any of that. I love the story where Jesus healed the blind man, and he goes to town and he tells people, "I was healed. I was blind, but now I can see." And the people say, "What exactly did he do? What is this, this magic that he's doing?" And asked a lot of questions according to the biblical account. And he said, "I don't know. But this I know, I was blind and now I see." And as to your other question about healing, I really believe the next big frontier of healing human bodies is going to be spiritual healing. You've heard of Bernie Siegel, wrote Love, Medicine, and Miracles. I think it was Bernie Siegel, the oncologist.
Yes.
I think I got my titles right.
Hmm.
Well, what got him interested in writing a book was he would send people home and say, "Well, you got about 90 days, you got 6 months, it's this is going to happen, nothing we can do." And this book, I think, was written in early 80s. And then he'd see those same people out in the grocery store 5 or 10 years later. And he finally started interviewing them and said, "What happened here?" And what they said was, "Well, doc, when you told me I had 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, whatever," they said, "I quit the job. I retired early. I got a divorce. I got married." I mean, they did the thing that they never felt like life gave them permission to do. They went and lived the life they're supposed to live. And his conclusion in the book is sometimes you got to ask yourself, if I found out I had 30 days to live, what would I change about my life? And, we can be reckless with that, but I also think it's pretty wise. And I bought a house because I moved to the Midwest and I lived with a family member for a time and I loved it. But then my family member got remarried and, didn't work anymore. So I bought this crummy little house in the Midwest and I fixed it all up. And then I realized how miserable I was with this house. I was like, okay, I fixed it up, but I'm very unhappy here. I remember I was sitting in the backyard, and it was a beautiful backyard. It looked out over trees, but I sat in the backyard and I thought, if I found out I had 30 days to live, what would I do? And I thought, I would sell this thing. So I called my buddy, the realtor, and I said, sell it. He said, you live there 30 days. I said, I know, I'm completely miserable. This was a mistake, and it's okay. Everybody makes mistakes. But I think when we really get mired in stuff, we have to back up and ask ourselves, am I really living the life I want to live? So to go back to your question about the suffering in the world, I mean, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, a million people have written books on why do human beings struggle. And all I can think is I hope it's about spiritual growth. But would I give up this spiritual growth to not have had these experiences? Probably. Yeah, sure. Who doesn't want the easy life? And yet I have observed people who do not have trauma, like people who, they graduate high school, they go to college, they meet their person, they get married, the kids don't die, kids don't, things go well. I've observed they screw up their own life. It's like humans can't take but so much peace and harmony. But yeah, it has been, it has not been an easy path. I don't know why people suffer, but all I know is that I know that it was God that healed me. And the other thing I love this. I get a lot of how do you know this wasn't just your brain shutting down? After all, you'd had that morphine, you had some drugs in you. How do you know this wasn't just your brain shutting down? Blah, blah. And I said, well, because when I died, I had stage 2 cancer. And when I came back, it was gone. And also my heart was healed, in terms of the incredible self-recrimination, guilt, and sadness I experienced. And that wasn't healed instantly, but I had a new view. And so when I'd say, why did he do this? I thought he loved me. I'd say, wrong question. You loved him. You can't work out his salvation. You loved him. That's all you can really know and control. And so many of these questions that I'd ask myself over and over and over again, I had the answers and I was able to redirect. And honestly, in some ways, I'm still healing from this. But boy, I tell you, there's nothing worse than feeling like you're responsible for somebody's doing this. And I was liberated from that.
Yeah, I do want to tell you that at the beginning of the episode, it was a little unexpected that we spent time there on that subject of suicide and going through that. And I can't thank you enough for that, because I
Oh,
think
well,
that
thank you.
that will help people in a way that I hadn't imagined that what we would talk about could help. But I believe that things come through that need to come through at just the right time. And I thank you for putting that into this conversation and letting us know a little bit more about your life, before your second day to death, apparently.
Yeah.
How about that? I guess lastly, Rosemary, I want to, yeah, okay, I have to say this apparently. The wholeness, the energy around that, when you talk about being restored to wholeness, and then you made a comment about it wasn't that the disease would be healed or this or that. So it wasn't like a pinpointed list, right? It was just about wholeness. And I find that quite remarkable. And I just really wanted to highlight that for everyone listening or watching, because we tend, I think, to make a list as humans, right? It's like, well, I want this or that or this or that. And perhaps there's a greater vision for ourselves and for our life. And perhaps that is just wholeness. And knowing that if we become whole, if we restore our wholeness, everything else just falls into place as a part of that, like dominoes or everything just coming together. And I don't know, for some reason I just feel like that's important. It isn't about the list of things, the whack-a-mole approach. It's the limitlessness of what wholeness, I think, really means. And so I love that part of your story. I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I guess what I'd like to know before we wrap up is, where are you now? What's important for you now after all of these things, this immensely rich life, these experiences that you've had? Where are you now? Who's Rosemary today?
That's a big question, too. um, I guess one of the drawbacks of the podcast, which I do enjoy them very much. There was a time I was like, I can't do this again. But I realize it is a help for other people, and I do enjoy them. And I always learn something, which is great. Hosts such as yourself ask questions that make me rethink some things, and that's very helpful. um, I am so far from perfect. I mean, I am the average Joe in the world. I still have anxieties about things. I still get scared about things. And I tell myself, oh, you're better than this. You can do better than this. So every day of my life, I arise early and I take some time to be grateful for the trees in the yard or the little squirrels that I see scamper through or any one of many things. I do still keep a daily list of 5 things for which I'm grateful. But I do believe that being spiritually disciplined requires a lot of focus. And it would be so easy. And sometimes I see myself doing it, sinking back into the mire. And I tell myself, no, we're not doing that. So I do still have my challenges and my struggles. Um, it's, I don't know, people get this unrealistic idea that I'm a much better person than I am. I mean, I was somewhere in a line, I guess it was in a grocery store somewhere, and I got aggravated with the clerk. And afterwards I thought, why did you do that? And I'm actually practicing forgiving myself and asking, why do I still do things like that? So it is to me a daily discipline to observe my own behaviors and think, okay, I don't want to do that again. How can I do better? They say that Benjamin Franklin kept almost like a spreadsheet, but a list of behaviors he wanted to eliminate from his life. And every morning he would grade himself on, okay, I didn't gossip today. That's better. I didn't complain about somebody today. I didn't fuss at a shopkeeper. And I've been thinking about actually undertaking that specifically because my goal, early on after my husband's suicide, I asked this woman to come be with me, to come visit me. And she was a very sweet woman, several years younger than me. But when she was in her adolescent years, her sister had ended her life literally in the adjoining bedroom and had used a gun. And my friend spent several years getting over that and learning how to face life again. And what she said helped her was she wrote on a piece of paper, "Help me heal so that I can help others heal." And very early on, I did the same thing. And I put several pieces of paper throughout my house. And that was my goal then. And that is still my goal, to help me heal so I can help others heal. And so where am I now? I spend a lot more time trying to appreciate the natural beauty of the world. And sometimes it overwhelms me, brings tears to my eyes. I sleep with one of my windows open so I can hear the birds in the morning because the sound of the birds is, I think, a glimpse of heaven. So, but I still have a lot of things I'm really striving and working on to fix. I think it's just part of the human condition. In fact, I've been listening to a song. Uh, I hope I can quote it, but the artist is Mother Mother, and the name of the song is "It's All Right." And it's about somebody who says he blew up his life. He made so many mistakes today. I think it's like I did a billion stupid things today. And then the chorus is, "It's all right." And it's one of the most beautiful songs. And so I listen to that a lot. But yeah, again, I think life on this earth is hard. And having an NDE, it was a blessing, but it also came with some challenges. If you Google NDE plus depression, you get a lot of hits. Because after you come back from this and you're like, wow, this is all very surreal. What's real is the spiritual portion of life and all this stuff we see. And, the actors who walk onto our life and say, "You're a bad person. I don't like you." And then they walk off. You're like, well, why do they say that to me? And then you got to back up and say, okay, they're playing a role. And they may not even know what they're doing. And they may not even know what they're saying. So yeah, it's been challenging for me. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk about that. That I have so much room to grow and to learn more about God's grace. Just so much room.
Thank you so much for that beautifully
You're welcome.
put glimpse into you. And yeah, I've got a lot to ponder after our conversation. I so thank you, Rosemary, and you welcome people to reach out to you on your
Yes,
website. Is that correct?
correct. The website is temporarydeath.com, just like it sounds, because I eschew the term near death. Near death is if, you're in a plane and it's going bad and the pilot pulls it out at the last minute. I wasn't near death. I was way beyond it.
Yeah.
Yeah, temporarydeath.com.
Temporarydeath.com.
And there's
So
a contact Rose button there.
yes, and they can contact you, and you try very hard to get back to everyone, I know, but you do get
I
a
do.
lot. Yeah.
I get about 20 emails a day, but that's okay. And I read every single email, and I always take just a few seconds and ask God to bless them and to hold them in the light and to be with them. So, and especially when somebody says, "Would you pray for me?" I always do. I know our time is out, but there's a Quaker saying called, "I will hold you in the light." And I think the whole of it is, "I will hold you in the light of God's love." And I love that. What a simple but profound prayer. And sometimes I think about just grabbing somebody in a bear hug and holding them in the light in that white room
Mhm.
and just letting them feel that spiritual car wash, cleanse them from all the muck that earth has tried to lay on them.
And no doubt you're bringing that light to them. I have no doubt
I
about
hope
that at
so.
all. Thank you again, Rosemary, for being here. What an honor it's been for
Oh,
me.
thank you.
And I invite the listeners, please reach out and connect with Rosemary.
Thank you.
Thank you. And from myself and the team here at Beyond the Reiki Gateway, we'd like to say thank you to our listeners for all of your support, including leaving great reviews, becoming BTRG insiders, and sharing this show with your friends and family. Drop us a line at info@beyondthereikigateway.com anytime. Tell us what's on your mind and take great care. Until next time. Thank you again for joining me. Please check the description underneath this video to learn more, connect with us, and get some important information about your listening experience. Wishing you all the best until we meet again beyond the Reiki Gateway.